So my guest today is Arden Stiles. He's the Chief Commercial Officer at Seed Homes. Arden, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Caleb. It's going to be great. Thanks, Caleb.
Awesome. So, for those listening, give us just a brief background of your journey. Like, where did it start? How did it go? And how did you find yourself really building enterprise value, as I understand it, for Seed Homes? Tell us about the journey.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was born and I'm here now. So what happened in between, right?
Exactly.
Well, it's a bit of a convoluted journey as most people's careers happen nowadays. Caleb is, I'm sure, your career as well. I didn't end up started in marketing. I didn't start in marketing at all.
Okay.
I went to business school, did that route, got into management consulting. But I usually start by saying that because the management consulting really gives you an idea of how business works, right? You're working with many different companies, small, large, Canada, international. So you start to see patterns in what works and what isn't effective. So that was a great business foundation. And then I started working in operations, venture capital, and the marketing flex started to come through. And my dad used to be a marketer too, so it's a bit of a chip off the old block.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but what I'm doing now, though, it's really about marketing. And what I've seen in the industry, Caleb, as I'm sure you have as well, is that a lot of companies miss it. They just miss what is the essence and what are they trying to communicate and what are people actually buying, and what are you actually selling? A lot
Right.
of that gets missed.
Yeah.
And if you're just driving on the road and you see the billboard signs,
Yeah.
I'm looking at those and I say, that doesn't mean anything, doesn't say anything, and that's totally ineffective. So kind of that intellectual jousting that goes along to approach marketing in a more effective way.
So I love what you say about, having a foundation of business logic and business strategy and really using that as a framework to be, frankly, a more effective marketer. In my mind, from my perspective, business is marketing, marketing is business. And so tell us more about how that sort of foundation of business knowledge provides the right lens to be the best marketer possible in today's space.
Yeah. Well, when it comes down to the most basic element, right? You can forget all the business school theories and everything. You have to sell something that people want to buy. There has to be a supply and demand thing there, right? So there has to be an exchange of value between two parties. So in business, it's about how do you actually create the value? Is it production efficiency? Is it HR? Is it finance? It's just creating, taking resources and then changing them and then creating a value exchange to somebody that buys it.
Yeah.
But the marketing exits around that is how do you convince people to separate themselves from their money? Very difficult to do, right? People want to hang on to their money.
Right.
But Apple, for example, there's millions of people all over the world that are happy to spend an incredible amount of money for a phone, right? And they managed to convince people, and now it's a trillion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar company.
Right.
So that essence of how do you actually convince people? How do you make it compelling and do that over and over and over? That's what gets me excited and interested in and sharing some of my ideas.
Yeah, and in our previous chat, you reminded me of a truth, I think you can call it, about marketing and business, really, that it's never the thing that people are buying, is it? It's the utility it serves, it's the end state that it puts them in, it's the desire it helps them get closer to. And how much is that theory, that concept, a part of the way you play this game, the way you think
Right.
about building strategies?
Yeah. So it comes down to this. It's you have to sell the emotional benefit you provide, not necessarily the product you're selling,
Right.
right? So let me repeat that because it can be a little bit, you have to sell the emotional benefit you provide and not the product you're selling. Okay. So for example, David Ogilvy, a famous marketer, he's got a quote that says, you can't save souls in an empty church.
Yeah.
You have the best church in the world, whatever. But if there's nobody that's sitting there listening to you, right, it's not going to work. So that's the process of marketing, is attracting the congregation to your church, whatever that may be.
Right.
Soft drinks, fancy cars, scented water, all that stuff. Like it's amazing how For example, Christian Dior can convince people to spend $200 on a scented water.
Right.
It's amazing, but it's a multi-billion dollar product line.
Yeah, and I
Anyway,
guess looking at it through that lens helps the organization have a much longer shelf life, have a much longer sort of sustainable practice because they're not tethered to something that, in all respects is finite to some, trends come and go, product utility comes and goes. There's a better mousetrap around the corner,
all the time. That's
right?
right. That's right.
So
So
yeah, go.
yeah.
Yeah,
So the way that's so on that vein is what is the company becoming? So if you're an organization, right, what are you becoming as opposed to what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis, right? So what is the company aspiring to be versus what you're selling on a day-to-day basis? They're both important, but without that aspirational what you're becoming, without that,
yeah.
then what you're selling it could be obsolete overnight.
What's an example of that? What you're becoming concept.
Right. Exactly. And I'm going through this with my organization right now. But let's give an example that everybody's familiar with. So Starbucks. So for example, Schultz, the guy that started Starbucks, he said, okay, there's lots of coffee shops out there, right? But he took his inspiration from the Italian, the European tradition of coffee. But what he realized is that it's not really the coffee, but it's a place to congregate,
Right.
right? So Starbucks became Aspire 2 and actually became what the third place. The first place is home.
Right.
Second place is the office. But Schultz recognizes that in North America, we need a third place to congregate. So let's Starbucks become that third place,
Right.
and I'm just going to happen to sell them coffee while they're there,
Yeah. No, that's a
right?
classic example that we all learn about, but I guess failed to realize where the origin was of that strategy. And it's
Yeah.
funny with with that one in particular, it's too bad that the third place really started to become freelancers office. And they're only buying one coffee, so they had to figure that out. And
That's right. And now, just recently, you can't sit there unless you buy
yeah,
something.
yeah,
Right? So,
makes
so
sense.
yeah, it makes sense. They're evolving, right? That's now McDonald's, on the other hand, they make their restaurants deliberately uncomfortable to sit. Have you ever noticed that?
In
So,
and out. Yeah.
yeah, there's been a lot of industrial design around the seats. So, if you go to McDonald's, you sit down, you eat your burger, but after about 4 minutes, it's not comfortable,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's on purpose to get you out of there,
for
right?
me after 4 minutes, it's not comfortable because my kids are throwing ketchup packets around the walls and
Absolutely. Yeah. So I experienced that too. But at Starbucks, you get the nice comfy loungers, you get the jazz music in the background, the fireplace.
totally.
At least when the Starbucks first started, now it's not quite like that anymore, right?
Love it. Love the example. I appreciate that. Bring us to Seed Homes.
Yeah.
What problems does Seed Homes solve for
Okay.
whom, and why are you best suited to solve those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So Seed Homes is a manufacturer of modular homes. Now, there's lots of modular homes out there, Caleb, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah,
There's hundreds, thousands of them.
yeah,
But what makes Seed Homes different is that the fact that they're made almost entirely of steel. So that's important because, for example, Los Angeles, the whole thing burnt down, Pacific Palisades, because it was all built out of wood. So a lot of municipalities throughout North America are looking at different ways to build, and steel is a good way to do it.
right.
So Seed Homes built entirely out of steel. But what makes them very unique is that we have a wall system that folds into a central utility corridor. So all the weight of the home, and the weight are the bathrooms and the kitchens in the middle of the home, and the walls fold into that structure, and that entire thing is shrink wrapped and put on the back of a truck, and
Hmm.
it can be shipped intermodally anywhere in the world. So we're getting lots of interest from Canada's Arctic right down to Central America, Panama, and Costa Rica because of the fact that you can fold up a fully
Yeah.
assembled home and ship it intermodally just about anywhere in the world.
So for us neophytes on this idea of transportation and the logistics surrounding moving these products,
Yeah.
what is that folding into the center create from an advantage standpoint? Maybe an economic thing? Is it a why does that matter other than it can go faster down the highway?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a good point. So the unfolding, it creates a lot of interior space.
Okay.
And the fact that the steel walls on the exterior create the structural integrity of the home itself. So inside now, you don't need any support, poles or anything like that. It's one contiguous space. It's like a
Got it.
bowling alley.
Yeah.
So you get tremendous amount of square footage, which is very versatile.
Right.
And so part of the essence of Seed Homes is the versatility and freedom in your lifestyle now, because you're not hindered by these huge mortgages
Yeah.
and all this maintenance and wood rotting and mold. That doesn't happen in a Seed home. So now you have it's a home, but that gives you a sense of freedom,
I love it.
financial and otherwise.
Yeah, you're seeing these pop up all over the place, and it's now about before when it was the early adopter stage, it was just, hey, you build a modular home, you're in the market and you're in the money. But
Right.
now you're needing to look at ways, I'd imagine, to obviously differentiate and create a different emotional end state, right? That
Yeah,
you're talking about.
absolutely. And the roofs of our homes are sloped as well. So a lot of modular homes have flat roofs. So
Right.
it's difficult to get permits,
Yeah.
especially in Canada because of the snow loads, right? So we have a sloped roof structure, 112 slope, and you get up to 10-foot interior ceiling heights. So you get a real sense of space once you're inside this home.
Awesome. And so now, what do you get paid to do? What's your mandate as you understand it?
Yes. So my mandate, my title is Chief Commercial Officer, but what does that really mean? So I look at any of the commercial relationships that the organization is either considering or enters into. So the marketing and the brand promise and the essence of what we do from a digital asset perspective is within my portfolio.
Okay.
But I also look at setting up new suppliers and opening up new franchisees basically anywhere in the world, and supply chains. What happens when Trump puts the tariffs in?
I was going to say,
I
you
look at all that,
you brought
right?
it up, not me.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about that as early as this morning with my team. But really what I do is translate the brand promise into a series of digital assets, because 99% of everyone that interacts with Seed Homes does through a digital basis,
Right, right.
a browser or whatever it may be, social media. So that's the first interface of a client, a skeptical client, with what we do.
So an easy job, as it sounds. There's a lot going on
Yeah,
there.
it's a challenge.
But when we first chatted and got to know each other quickly on our pre-call, you told me about it's about, at least the way you see it, is lifting up or creating holistic enterprise value. So
Correct.
value can be generated through, a lot of different touch points and arenas of getting your brand in front of people that either have influence over the expression of your brand or have purchasing power and desire to buy it. And it's a broad mandate, but I think that what I'm curious about is
Yeah,
within the different roles. Let's take marketing for the main
sure.
example because our audience. How do you keep the main thing when you're focused on a function within this umbrella?
Yes. Yeah, the main thing is to keep the main thing,
Right.
which presupposes that your team understands what the main thing actually is,
Okay.
right? So that's all about strategic planning.
Yeah.
So, create the strategies, that's the main thing, and then execute on the main thing. You're right, it is very difficult, and I encourage your listeners to think about that. You have to kind of step back and what is the main thing here?
Right.
And in my mind, the main thing is not sales, but it's elevating the value, the prominence, the positioning of the entire enterprise vis-a-vis the market,
Right.
right? So if you think about a rising tide floats all boats,
Right.
what I like to do is help rise the tide. So maybe I'm the moon that's creating that moon pull to create that rise. And you're absolutely right. It's many different channels. It
Yeah.
could be social media. It could be giving a keynote presentation at a conference. It could be participating in a trade mission with the government to California, for example, to
Right.
address the fires. It could be doing podcasts like this, sharing thought leadership. All those verticals lifts that tide that enhances the overall value of the organization.
Right.
So, do I do sales? Absolutely. I had a sales call this morning, but the vast majority of what I do is not sales. Sales is a result.
Yeah.
but I rise the tide. So for your listeners, they should ask yourselves as a listener, how do I rise the tide in my position for my organization?
Right.
And I guarantee your boss will recognize that.
So how might a now knowing that marketing is one of the functions within your purview, but stepping into the shoes of a director, a VP, a CMO within the marketing realm, um, from that position, from that vantage point, what are some ways that you could live into this idea of adding value beyond the limitations of your function, but raising all boats? What would be
Yes. Yes. So you have to kind of broaden your scope and your horizon of what you're looking at.
okay?
So if you're a CMO in an organization, small to medium business, you can
Yeah,
say, okay, yes, I need to do social media posts, I need to do all this, I need to do whatever it may be. But that's this. So how do we expand that? So the first thing is awareness, Caleb. So just being aware that your vision might be a little narrow. So thinking back and just expanding that horizon. How else can I create influence in the market?
right.
Is a key question to ask,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And philanthropy is a great way to do that. Volunteering, sponsorships, that kind of thing is a great way to do that. But step back and critically assess what can I do
yeah,
for the other functions in my organization to enhance their presence
yeah.
in what we're doing.
So I would imagine, and I guess I know this for sure, that one of the limiting factors from being able to play the game that way is that unfortunately, there's so many marketing leaders today that are being held accountable by their sort of non-marketing bosses or senior leaders to
Yes,
have attribution. Everything you do must have an attributed dollar and cents value, which really puts the blocks on you thinking peripherally, you know,
exactly.
because some of the value you're talking about creating, whether it be speaking or engaging in like a meaningful networking group, the dividends may yield way later, and they may not be able to
Yeah.
show up on a report. So, how do you deal with that?
Well, yes, and I've dealt with that in my career as well. It depends on the organization's culture, and the leadership ethos as well.
Yeah,
So I've worked with leaders that are scientific and show me an ROI on this specific thing. I've also worked for leaders where do whatever you want.
right.
Do whatever you want within certain parameters. So think of it as a large pasture,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
leaders set up a fence around a large pasture, but you've got lots of movement within that pasture,
right,
right? And so if for your listeners, you can say, okay, what type of organization do I want to contribute to? Where do I want to be? Do I want to be in that organization where I'm really micromanaged and they have a very narrow perspective on what value is? Or do I want to work on the other side of the spectrum or somewhere in between?
right,
Now, organizations nowadays you have to understand this side, the scientific side, but you also have to be creative and adaptable.
right.
So, as everybody knows, Trump just, hit everybody with tariffs last night and now heck's breaking loose.
Yeah,
So, as our organization, we say, okay, what's going to happen to our supply chain? What's going to happen to the steel? What's going to happen to our pricing?
yeah,
So that's up to the minute what I'm experiencing too, and that will trickle down to the digital assets that the market actually sees,
right. Okay.
right? So you have to be nimble.
Yeah, and you have to be able to. What I'm hearing is sort of you have to be able to float between the clouds and the dirt and multiple times a day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that your listeners, leaders, understand that as well.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, in many, if not most organizations, that's not the case.
right.
But what happens is those types of organizations become stagnant or stale, and other organizations rise and prevail, right? You see this jousting out in the marketplace.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to watch that dynamic.
So I think in addition to thinking creative and micro and long term and short term, perhaps what I'm hearing too is just asking the question, why am I doing X? And be curious to what the answer is on the other end of that, because that oftentimes kind of positions you to think more holistically, right?
Absolutely. So Steve Jobs said it best, think different.
Right.
Now it's simple to say that, it's two words, but how do you actually think different? So I encourage my team all the time. We have to think different, but what does that actually mean? So I'll give you a concrete example. in a lot of our digital assets that the market sees, it doesn't mention a home at all. It doesn't show an image of a home,
Right.
doesn't tell the statistics or the technical features of the home, nothing. And I've been asked that many times. I mean, how come you're not talking about how high the ceiling is or how thick the steel is? The whole point is not to do that,
Yeah.
right? And Steve Jobs, he did if you can search it on YouTube, just type in Steve Jobs Apple marketing. It's about 8 minutes, and he delivers easily the best 8 minutes in marketing ever. And that's when the Think Different campaign came out for Apple.
Yeah.
It didn't talk about speeds or feeds or computers or laptops, nothing. It
Well,
just talked about the game changers of the world.
right. And whether you're buying a pair of shoes or a modular steel home, I think we all know that, the old adage, like people buy with their emotional side of their brain and they justify with logic later. So if we're leading in the go-to-market messaging with we have the best mousetrap, we're really missing the part of the croc brain that is is
Yeah,
getting you into buy mode, right?
you hit the nail right on the head, Caleb. So people don't like to be sold to, but people always like to buy,
That's right. Ask my
right?
wife.
Yeah, exactly. So a classic example is a Ferrari. I could go down and buy a Chevy Corvette. Great performance, looks great, same as just as fast as a Ferrari, cost 75 grand. Or I could go buy a Ferrari, pay 350,000, and you say to yourself, well, what's the difference? What's the difference for me personally?
Right.
Well, the difference is because Ferrari has the
Yeah.
brand mystique,
Right.
right? Only a Ferrari's leather smells like that,
Right.
right? Only a Ferrari has that sound of the exhaust.
Right. And two
In fact,
different customers might, like one of the customers that buy a Ferrari might be buying it because of a status motivated thing, and another one for like rich heritage of a brand. There's different reasons, but both of those are not around the chassis or how much horsepower it puts out.
exactly.
Okay.
And only a Ferrari can deliver that feeling in the purchaser.
Got it.
And that's why they can charge such an incredible premium.
Yeah.
And a Corvette can't.
Right.
So, and then communicating that is the essence of marketing and branding.
I like your approach and I like your perspective. As a leader of a
Yeah.
marketing function, and really beyond that, but what would you claim to be your superpower that really positions you well to play this game well in your mind? Something that
Yeah.
you're so confident in. It's been your sort of ace in the pocket for a while. What's your superpower?
Well, I'd like to say that I could read minds or levitate, Caleb, but I can't. But I think my superpower is understanding, fundamentally understanding that people buy feelings and not products.
Right.
Okay, so they're buying a feeling. That's the fundamental thing. The other trick is how do you translate that into an image or copy
Right.
that appeals to your audience? That's very tricky to do, and
Mhm.
your organization does that masterfully. And also the big New York marketing firms. Imagine how much they charge to do that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's what they're providing to their client.
Right.
And for your listeners, once you discover what that is, once you discover that emotional benefit your product or service provides, I can guarantee that your team will have a renewed sense of energy,
Ah,
and it will really accelerate if a firm like your firm, Caleb, can translate that into digital assets that people can see and post and all that.
yeah.
That's very hard to do, but whoever does that effectively,
Right.
they win in the market. It's really that simple.
So I guess you would see a big part of your job when there's team members involved to be a master storyteller around the why behind why this product and service exists,
Yes.
the state of place and mind that you want your ideal customer to be in when they experience it, and then sort of using that as a perhaps a template that those folks can use to execute their thing, whether it's an email or social media post, whatever.
Correct. Because that's what I call the brand essence, and it permeates every aspect of the organization, and it's also permanent, right? So So a technical innovation may come or go, but the
Right.
permanence of that emotional thing continues. Think about Ferrari, right? The feeling of the Ferrari has been around for decades. It'll be around forever,
Yeah.
but the model of car changes, right? All the time. They got convertibles, they got four doors, they got small SUVs, everything. But the essence of what they do permeates. Another example is Tempur-Pedic mattress, right? They don't sell mattresses, they sell a good night's sleep,
Yeah.
right? And that will never change. Everyone always wants a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
But when I think, oh, I've got a shoulder pain or hip pain because of my mattress, I think
Yeah.
Tempur-Pedic. I don't think Sealy.
Yeah. And when you're thinking in these ways, you're sort of building a moat around your brand because it's very easy to compete against somebody if you're just competing on product because you can always
Right.
be better. Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Then
And
you're just if you're just competing on price or whatever, then you're
yeah,
just a commodity,
right, right,
right?
right.
Right. So the other thing to keep in mind too, Caleb, for your listeners is you won't be able to convince anybody to do anything or to change their mind, right? So
Totally.
so in terms of your marketing, you're not trying to convince anybody, but you want to be top of mind once they've already decided.
Yeah.
So that's really key, right? So for example, when I'm thirsty and I want a soft drink, I think Coke,
Right.
not Pepsi. Why? Right? Well, because Coke spends hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that when I think I want a sugary, bubbly water, I think Coke, not Pepsi.
Right.
Even though Pepsi probably tastes better, but it doesn't matter.
No, I got it.
Yeah.
Yes, and what on the is your Achilles heel, the area that you would put your hand up and say, this is a weak area for me as a marketing leader.
Yeah. So the weak area is always coming up with new ideas,
Okay.
right? So you tend to run out of creative ideas. It's very hard to come up with new ideas, and it kind of it's like a sponge that you're squeezing,
Yeah.
and it eventually gets dry. So to counteract that, this kind of sound funny, but travel, or just getting out of the city, or looking at different experiences and different ways of communicating ideas
Yeah.
it fills up that sponge again with water.
Yeah. At least get out of the office.
Get out of the office, like just go to for example, I go to Indigo over lunch and just look at the magazines, browse the magazines, fashion magazines, car magazines, and what are other marketers out there doing that is different or unique or whatever, and then that just kind of fills up your sponge,
Right.
right? And you can apply that kind of thing as you go forward. But that's the hardest part, is coming up with new ideas.
Yeah. And it's exhausting.
It's very exhausting, and then putting copy around that,
Yeah.
right? And then linking the two together. Oh yeah, very difficult.
Besides things like tariffs and sort of more macroeconomic factors, so that stuff aside, what's the biggest challenge from a marketing standpoint that you and your team are faced with right now that you're excited about working on, but it's perhaps
Yeah.
not yet solved?
Yeah, well, so the marketing budget is always tight, right?
Yeah.
Caleb, as I'm sure you've experienced in your organization working with other clients, it's tight. And the other thing is convincing the decision makers, or those that control the purse strings, to allocate more dollars and budget to marketing activities.
Yeah.
That is really challenging. My rule of thumb is whatever your revenue is, spend 10% on marketing, roughly, right? So it sounds like a lot. Absolutely, it's a lot. However, again, you got to be top of mind. When somebody thinks, I want a modular home, I
Yeah.
want Seed Homes to pop in their mind and not whatever the competition is.
So when you're in a scenario where you are needing to advocate instead of the word convince, but advocate for budget allocation
Yeah.
without getting into the nitty-gritty details, what's your general approach for leaning on that business background you have to sort of establish the business case and make it a look as an investment as compared to just a random cost?
Yeah, exactly. So it's always important to show evidence. So you touched on that earlier, Caleb, about if you post this or boost that on Facebook, you get this many hits, whatever. So there is an aspect of showing the science around the effectiveness
Right,
or lack thereof of posting something or creating something,
right.
right? And then from there you attach it. Okay, so instead of spending $1,000, if we spend $10,000 and we spread it over 4 markets,
Mm.
we can reasonably expect that the hit rate to go up to this, or the traffic rate to go up to this. So there's a correlation,
Yeah.
right? So you have to appeal to the analytical mind of the decision maker, but also the emotional mind of the decision maker.
Right.
And that's when I usually present a new campaign or a new look and feel of something. For example, we're just launching our small but mighty campaign. So images of things that are typically small out there, but they're actually mighty,
Yeah.
because seed homes it's a small company and the homes are small,
Yeah.
but they're mighty in the sense that they're fire resistant, mold resistant. There's no wood, there's nothing that can rot in them. So it's very resilient given the climate change that we're experiencing today.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a mix.
Yeah. And it's not just going in and saying, I need more budget. End of story.
No. Sometimes that works, but
We
often,
laugh.
yeah, normally it
Too
doesn't.
many times, too many times that happens. So, I understand that you are operating with a lean marketing team, as most organizations are. So, um, how do you best set things up? How do you best put people in their area of genius? How do you best run this function when you have a very real
Right.
constraint around time and expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I want to make sure that we've got the tools in place to leverage. So it's usually cloud-based tools, where we can, for example, post that it goes across multiple channels just with one click, or cloud-based photo AI imagery tools that minimize our costs but maximize what we can create with a very small resource load. And then on top of that, layer it with a very clear plan, very clear but simple. So what's going to happen on Monday? What's going to happen on Tuesday? What's going to happen to the 5 days leading up to the launch, which is what we're actually preparing for now. So everybody's got a clear role. They have the right tools, but they also need to have the right skills. So that's very important as well. Do the resources have the skills to do imagery and photo editing and AI prompts, and also write copy? Can they do all of that in one individual? That's hard to find, but they're out there.
Yeah, very hard to find. And I would I agree with the order of operations that you're talking about. One small thing is I would challenge, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
what would you say to the, perhaps the social media purists that would argue, content that's built for, say, Instagram, if it's auto posted to Facebook, they're two different audiences, they're two different communities. So what are the risks associated with leaning too much on some of the automation, but not remaining consistent with the nuance demanded by each of the channels?
yeah, you're absolutely right. We get a lot of inbound inquiry through Facebook,
Right.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
The Instagram, not so much. And then we also do LinkedIn. So there's different audiences depending on the channel. So I take your point very well. LinkedIn, it's all about business and the professionalism of it and sharing knowledge, etc. Whereas the Facebook, Instagram is more of the emotional based posting
Right.
and eliciting discussion,
Right.
right? Two-way discussions, inquiries back and forth, and just getting, frothy and good information going back and forth, again, to increase the exposure of the organization
Right.
out there.
Yeah. So maybe it's some posts that will serve across all three channels, but
Correct.
I do hear like a channel specific strategy.
Yes.
Anyways, I don't want to angle on that, but um, when you're leading a function, it's not just the delivery of assets and the execution of campaigns, but there's also a human component to it. So I'm curious a little bit about how you're approaching things within your role as it relates to the building up and the supporting of people, whether they're immediately on your team or one layer peripheral to that
Right. So
organization.
for me, it comes down to one word, Caleb, and that's inspiration. So you have to inspire the team. And, I've worked with a lot of teams over the years. And when you work with your team to discover what the essence of what you're doing is,
Yeah.
whether it's a product or service, that energy really permeates and really propels the organization forward, especially if your team can contribute to what that essence is, right? So if people feel a sense of buy-in and ownership and contribution, they're going to be much more engaged in the discussion and then supporting you going forward,
I love it.
right? So inspire the team.
Yeah. And bring them into what I hear is you can create inspiration by making them understand why they're there and what the mission is. Because and allowing them to put their thumbprint on it, I guess, in some cases, because
Absolutely.
people support what they help create, and that is
Absolutely.
inspiring. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was funny when you and I first chatted, we said it's a slippery slope with when you get into conversations with like-minded people like this, because what's planned as a half an hour could really go 3 hours, and I have a number of other things, but I want you to leave us with this.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that you're talking to a marketing manager or a coordinator, someone who has aspirations of growth within the discipline of marketing. So they want to be a leader of a function in a team,
Yeah.
but they're not sure what laying tracks down looks like. Or uh, what words of advice or thought would you give these folks?
Okay. So in that case, I would challenge that individual to turn around and challenge their leaders to think different.
Okay.
Okay. So as a theme, but to think different, you have to bring examples to the table. So if you're selling a service, what is it about that service that you can discuss differently with the market? And then how do you convince your leaders to actually support that going forward? What you want to do is raise their eyebrows and leave them with a sense of, wow, I'd never thought of that before.
Right.
This person has really good ideas. I don't know how that person came up with it, but I love it.
Yeah.
Let's let them go forward with it.
Right.
So if you can do that, inspire your leaders as well, but wrap it around an executable plan that makes sense for your business,
Mm.
right? So if they have thousands and thousands of dollars to spell, put a plan around it. If they don't, put a plan around it. But
Right.
just show how you can actually communicate that to the market.
Yeah.
And I guarantee your leaders will recognize that and really help your career progression.
I love it. What's next for Seed? Give us a quick preview of, what to expect over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. What's on the horizon? What causes
Yeah.
excitement at the group there?
Absolutely, Caleb. Right around the corner, we're expanding into the United States in about 2 weeks, actually. So I'm just preparing all of that. Expanding into the United States, so 8 different states in the United States. It's top of mind for everyone because tariffs. So now we'll be able to manufacture in the United States, so they won't be
Yeah.
imposed with the tariffs. We are also expanding into Central America, so Panama and Costa Rica. So we have very cool designs for the tropical climate down there. We're expanding into Eastern Canada as well. So look for those announcements. We will be shipping highly robust modular homes to Canada's Arctic. So the need up there for homes is unbelievable. They need thousands of homes,
Yeah.
but nobody can build up there. So now we're building here and shipping up. So
Right.
we have a number of our homes that will be on the barge in the spring, and up they go to basically the furthest northern inhabited community.
So this is a good, as a Canadian-based group, I think you probably would be thinking at some point, well, are we going to get flack for the US? But you're building here and you're building there.
Correct.
And it's just,
Yes.
what else are you going to do? You know?
Well,
It-
exactly. Yeah, we've been very strategic because we can ship down there,
yeah.
but we can make here and ship down there, but tariffs. So we'll make here, we'll make there with our U.S. counterpart, and away we go supply the home needs down there as well.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate you giving us a little glimpse to, how you're playing this great game of marketing. I think it's a game. It's a fun game. It's a
Sure.
serious game. But I love your approach to it. So thank you very much, Arden.
And thank you, Caleb. See you soon.
Awesome.